Alright guys, today I want to review some of the workflow automation frameworks that have gained quite a bit of popularity recently. It's all happening because of the AI development happening at such rapid pace and people willing to automate their work away. They learn about ChatGPT by playing around with its web interface enough time, and then they get tired of constant copy pasting stuff back and forth between the apps they used to deal with on a daily basis, and they learn about programmatic capability to operate with a LLM model via OpenAI API. But then what if they're not like quite coders? What do they do then, right? They come to these platforms because platforms allow them to intuitively build workflows out of existing elements by intuitively connecting the pieces and adding some additional logic, also in a no-code or low-code manner. And it's proven to be quite efficient for the use cases. So I want to go through some of the platforms mentioned on this list because they are quite of an interest. They're the most mature one, the most capable ones out there. First, I want to review Zapier because that's a mature platform for that reason, supports various apps and services, over 5,000 of them, in fact. There's some advanced features like conditional logic, filters, and scheduling. There is a multi-step operations as well. Supports team collaboration. You can delegate some work to your team members, can manage their permissions, and can track their activity. And just to give you an example, guys, this is an interesting workflow I put together the other day, which does a very simple job of analyzing content of blog post articles published by one vendor, extracting some valuable data, taking some summaries, and finally storing all of the result in a database in Notion. Okay, so I was interested in those articles, and I came to Apify to scrape content from multiple pages first, parse the data out, and organize it into a structured data set. And then I see it with Zapier. So once the run is finished, Zapier would kick in, fetch the content out, do some string processing, and finally loop through the results to store it in a Notion database item by item. Now let's look at the pricing, because the pricing could be a little bit confusing here. It supports so many various tiers that could mislead the person, especially if they haven't worked with the system before. As any SaaS provider, they have this free plan that allows you to experiment with the system a little bit. That's what I started with, and pretty much quickly I realized some of the considerable limitations that the platform has. For instance, the number of workflows is limited to just 5. They call it Zap. If you want to bring in one more Zap, you'd have to delete the old one, and that would mean they would lose all the progress done there, because you can't just export them somewhere else and import them afterwards. The number of tasks is limited to 100. And for you to understand, a task is just a successful completion of a workflow. So if you have 5 of them, you'd only be able to finish 20 times each. Another limitation is the type of a workflow. Usually, you associate a trigger with a certain action, but sometimes you want to do multiple action at the end. For instance, exporting data into Notion and Google Drive. So those kind of things aren't supported in a free plan. You'd need a multi-step Zap for that. And another limitation is that premium apps aren't supported at all. And the premium apps is actually the apps that users most desire. They connect them to the services that already use, probably their business, such as Salesforce, LinkedIn, Shopify. The next thing I want to discuss is Make, because Make is quite an incredible platform. I use it for my own projects, for quite a few, even paid for it for a couple of months, as well as for additional operations. It provides with a similar experience to Zapier, though could be a little bit harder to start with because of a steeper learning curve. It's really for technical users rather than business users to begin with. It's also not as comprehensive in terms of the number of supported services and integrations, but it's much friendlier on the pricing side because they only ask for $9 a month to unlock most of the scenarios and features. You have to be conscious about the data polling because they charge here for that. And it also supports much more advanced features like custom code modules, webhooks, and data transformations. Now, let me introduce you to a few of the scenarios I put together in Make. One of them is pretty much similar to what you saw in Zapier, though has some additional features worth considering. So I'm doing the exactly same thing here. I'm fetching the data first from Apify, but then I want to make sure that the item I'm about to add doesn't exist yet in Notion. I also want to make sure that I'm not going to exceed the OpenAI rate limit. And for that, I'm adding this sleep timer here. So the way from the model is that I'm asking it to do a few things for me and structure the output in a structured JSON document. For that, I have to parse that document in order to extract those fields into the variables that Make could interpret. And then finally, I'm adding this item into the database and it's done. This is my second, a little bit more advanced scenarios, guys, I wanted to demonstrate for you, just to show you some of the capabilities as well as limitations. The idea here is pretty much simple as well. What I'm doing is that I'm processing the document coming onto the webhook. I'm extracting contact information using OpenAI API, and I'm finally storing it in both places, in Notion database as well as Google Contacts. I'm also making sure I'm preventing duplicate events by searching an item in advance and then adding this conditional logic, whether it's not found or found, and correspondingly creating the item or updating it. I'm doing it for both data sources, and that actually brings us to the first limitation, which is that you can do these things in parallel. That is a known issue, and the workaround it is that you put together the router this way with one unconditional block, and basically what's gonna happen is that you're gonna process Notion first, and the control flow will go onto the another branch to process another thing. Imagine if you wanna add more data sources. Another known limitation is that you can only go as far as the module provides. If the API supports additional feature, there is no way to leverage that. Another thing I faced was that I wanted to update the contact without the phone number because the phone number wasn't identified in the document, and that basically is not quite supported. So all the fields have to be known in advance. This actually leads me to one of the issues, that is error handling, which is not really great here because the only thing you can do is just to ignore the error. There's no way to retry a thing. Another set of limitation, guys, you might want to know about if you ever gonna deal with this platform is behind troubleshooting. So the log retention, for instance, is limited to just 3 days. Every log is gonna be deleted that is longer than 3 days. Your scenario is going to be put on hold if it ever faces an error that needs to be resolved. That is something to keep in mind. So the last thing, guys, that falls into the bucket of resiliency is that the size of the webhook queue is limited to just 50 items, guys. So if the speed of events that you're sending onto the webhook exceeds the speed of processing them, you're gonna get in trouble. The next platform I want to introduce you to is called Pipedream. Pipedream is a bit more advanced platform in a way that it supports execution of custom code written in most popular languages such as JavaScript, Python, Go, or Bash. It's meant for developers, it's designed for developers. It's relatively easy to start with. It supports interactive debugging to streamline your development process. It also supports code sync, still in beta though, but it's the first attempt to remove this vendor lock-in, to being able to keep your code somewhere else for porting reasons, for testing reasons, for whatever sake. And it has a different pricing model. They have a notion of credit. They also operate with a notion of runtime environments, and they take a credit for a unit of execution instead of a task or operation that the previous two platforms did. And it has a little bit better error handling and concurrency control. Let's get into the pricing now. It's probably the most expensive platform out there with the least guarantees, in the sense that the money that you're putting in is probably not going to give you as much as you expect in the first place. It has to do with the fact that the pricing model based on credits. You're given a different amount of initial credits depending on your preferred tier. You can increase the amount, and every next 1,000 of credits gonna become cheaper for you if you commit to use more. The way credits work is that 1 credit is equivalent of an execution environment with 256 megabyte of memory to execute your workflow for 30 seconds. If it takes more than 30 seconds, you're gonna be charged 2 credits for that. If you're increasing the memory of your environment, you're gonna be charged more credits in a proportional amount. So now let's have a look at the interface one's going to be using when putting workflows together. So essentially it's a pipeline of actions connected sequentially and executed one after another. You can add as many actions as you want, at the end or in the middle. All starts with a trigger. And to follow up on my particular scenario, what I'm doing here is that I'm identifying the webhook trigger that I'm gonna be specifying in the Appify backend to send events to. And then there is a code-specific module for Appify. There's no visual module for Appify, so everything needs to be coded like this. Here, it's not a complete code, but you'd have to write code for extracting the data from that webhook payload, and then identify this data set item ID, and then retrieve the data from that data set, and then send it over into the processing block. That's gonna be the next block right here. And then finally updating the item in the Notion. But Notion has this visual block just to demonstrate you the difference, right? There's a visual block where you can actually use the fields to specify parameters for execution, but you don't have to. Notion also has a code block, so you can choose. Adding multiple items in a unique way is not supported for some reasons, or you identify some of the limitations. You can always fall back onto code specific block and write the logic right there. So for instance, this very file, create page.mjs, defines the action logic to create a page in Notion. It essentially declares the interface, or in other words, the input parameters you can see in their visual builder when choose this element. It also defines the actual logic so you can see what it's doing. It's all transparent. They're basically using Notion client libraries. And let's say you're not quite happy what it does, you can always customize it, but you can't change the existing action. What you're gonna have to do is they have the guideline to create your own action. And my point is that you can always use this code as a reference point, modify it locally, and publish it. Once you publish it, they provide you with their CLI to do all of this operational stuff. So once you publish it, it's gonna become available under the My Actions section. This customized version of the same action, but with your own properties and logic, and that's how you do it basically. Perhaps what makes this thing stand out is the ability to run it locally, and as a result, execute all of your workflows in your local environment while keeping their configuration in your local storage as well. Or you can choose to host it in a public cloud using AWS or GCP or Azure, or you can use one of these PaaS platforms to host it there as well. But don't fall under this, because even if you choose to host it yourself, not only it adds up an additional effort in setting things up and then maintaining them on the ongoing basis, it also imposes some license limitations onto your case. But you probably don't have to freak out, because the license is quite permissible. So for instance, you can use the platform for automating your internal business needs, right? It's just that you can't use it for external clients. You can't automate stuff for them. So you're gonna be very careful about it. And then another thing is that through self-hosting, you're actually making use of so-called community edition. And in the community edition, not every single feature is available. Things like external secrets, environments, SSO, or LDAP only gonna be available on the enterprise plan. Something to keep in mind. Speaking of which brings us to their pricing page that defines 3 available tiers for their monthly and annual subscription. Prices could seem a little lower than for the alternative systems like Zapier or Pipedream. Make still remains the cheapest one. But even though, what I'm noticing straight away is that for the starter tier, you're not getting as many features. For instance, some essential features like debugging only available in the Pro mode. And I have no idea how you can probably put together a complex workflow without proper debugging. But these first 2 options you're only going to be paying for if you go with their cloud offering. And if you choose to self-host it in your own server, you're getting all of these features out of the box at the expense of managing infrastructure and the service. You're still not gonna be getting any of the enterprise features for which you'd have to pay for the enterprise license. All right, let's explore a visual interface of this thing that I have installed locally as a community edition. It is not hard to set up, just a matter of a few npm commands. It comes as an npm package as well as Docker. I recommend starting with npm as the simplest option. It's always a good idea to start with an existing template because it gives you a good reference point, something functional to play with and further explore the tool. I've chosen this Telegram AI chatbot because it seems interesting enough for me, with a pretty peculiar control flow logic with some internal blocks, merging situations, the switch case element, as well as like tool-specific blocks for OpenAI API and Telegram itself. It all starts with a trigger, as always. We double click on this trigger, it's gonna show us some credentials, how to specify some trigger details, followed by a few internal blocks where we're basically setting up some variables, some prompts. This is an internal template engine based on JavaScript with a few string transformation functions. It's not coding yet, but it's capable enough to process strings. The logic then branches out. Here we were sending message back to the user, notifying that the bot started processing his request, because these guys will take some time. This is a merging block. We're expecting the inputs coming from two various paths. It follows by the switch case block, which basically determines the path forward. If the user is requesting a start message, we're gonna ask ChatGPT to write a welcoming message based on the user request. If the user is requesting image, we're gonna leverage DALL-E capability to generate an image for us. And then it all follows up by the reply, whether it's like a text-based or the image, in which case we're gonna be using another node with additional parameters for the photo. And that's basically it. I hope you found this video useful, so give it a like if you did. I'd really appreciate it because I put a lot of effort into it. And meanwhile, I'm working a few more videos for you to stay up to date about the newest tools and technologies with a focus on AI and automation. So drop me a comment or reach out to me in social media and let me know what you liked and what would you like me to talk about in the future videos. And with that said, I'll see you soon.